In this video I will show you my studio setup, my video equipment, and some tips and tricks that I have learned over 14 years of filming for this channel. I just ask that you bear with the voiceover because there is simply more information to give than the captions could reasonably handle. You're going to see a lot of equipment, including no less than 5 cameras, but I don't want to make it seem like I'm a wealthy person. I'm not, and everything you'll see here has been slowly accumulated over these 14 years, with at least half of this stuff being bought second-hand or heavily discounted. I'm saying this because I don't want you to think that you can't do what I'm doing. You probably can. It just takes time, savings, and a lot of premeditated shopping. Finally, I want you to know that this is not a sponsored video. I will be mentioning some brands and some products that I use, and I will share my opinions on them, but these are simply my personal opinions based on my experience. I don't consider myself a hardware or software expert. I learn by doing, and I still have a lot to learn, so there are probably more reliable opinions out there than mine. If you're okay with that, let's begin. My studio setup is pretty simple and consists of 2 softboxes facing a table. The softboxes are 80 by 60 centimeters big and face the table from 2 opposite sides. Roughly 8 o'clock and 4 o'clock relative to the table. This is a standard lighting setup, the idea being that the shadows cast by one softbox are cancelled by the opposite one, so there are almost no shadows between the object on the desk and the camera. There are only shadows behind the object, where the camera usually doesn't see them. In my previous Lego room I had the softboxes bolted to the ceiling using these special heavy-duty mounts. But drilling the ceiling in a Lego room is a messy business, and I didn't dare to do that this time. The plan is to bolt them to the ceiling again in my next and final Lego room in my own house, currently under construction. Each softbox contains 4 fluorescent lamps and a canvas for diffusing light, because Lego pieces are very shiny and don't look good if the lamps show as shining points reflected on them. The lamps I'm using are rated 85 watts each and produce cool white light, meaning a color of 5500 kelvins. The brightness of a single lamp is 4750 lumens. For a comparison, you need roughly a 12-watt LED bulb to produce 1000 lumens. In any case, these lamps are really bright. And really huge. The desk is a simple IKEA desk on a couple of trestles. I used to film on the floor level a lot, but my back is not as flexible as it used to be, plus this way I can pull up a chair and build a set on the desk. I'm using a white desk with a paper backdrop placed on it. I hang backdrops using a simple metal pipe because my Lego room can't accommodate anything fancier. I have several colors of backdrops, nearly all of them from the Savage brand and around 1.3 meter wide. I'd love to use wider backdrops so I could film bigger models comfortably, but again, maybe in my next Lego room. For many years I kept using white backdrop whenever possible, thinking that the brighter the footage the better. But I found that this wasn't entirely true, because dark backdrops often bring out the foreground colors better. And for quite a while now I was using primarily a dark gray backdrop. It's a Savage backdrop too, and the color is called Storm Gray if you're looking for it. Be aware that you'll need a strong lighting to get decent results with it. My modest workstation is in the same room. What I'm working on used to be a mid-range gaming PC back in 2012, so it's nothing special. GTX 770, Intel i5 4670K, and a lot of hard drives. I keep looking for a new PC but always come up against the same problem. Money. Rendering any longer 4K video on this rig takes hours, so I usually do it overnight. Luckily, the power director can turn the PC off when it's done. The final but essential feature of my studio is a big plush hamster. It comes in handy when you need to give something a good squeeze. My primary camera is Panasonic Lumix G7. It's a small mirrorless DSLR camera and I bought it back in 2015, as soon as it came out. I shot close to 250,000 individual clips with it and I'm very happy with it, although it has its limitations. For example, it's not weather sealed and it can't output a video feed over HDMI while recording. Still, it's a great camera that was built primarily for filming, but it can take decent photos as well. It's got a ton of options, built-in video filters, Wi-Fi, and it's 4K capable. Mine comes from European distribution, so it was actually locked to 2550 FPS, but thanks to an online tutorial I was able to unlock 3060 FPS on it. What I love most about this camera is the very clear layout of buttons, including many shortcut buttons. I can change almost anything I need here with just my right hand. What I don't like is the rather small LCD and modest battery life, which can't be extended using a grip or a wall socket adapter. Also, the maximum bitrate is just 100 megabytes per second for a 4K video, and 20 megabits per second for a 1081. The Lumix GH5, which is only 2 years younger than G7, can already do 400 megabytes per second. As you can see, I'm using a small rig cage for this camera because it makes the camera harder to drop for me and because it provides many mounting options. For example, I can do that. Or that. When it comes to lenses, I'm using the standard 14 to 42 mm Lumix kit lens and an Olympus 9 to 18 mm wide-angle lens. I could probably do with a macro lens in addition to that, but these are just too expensive. First, the Canon EOS 70D. It's a huge classic DSLR camera that I bought 7 or 8 years ago for filming, and well, it's the reason why I'm using the Lumix G7 now. You see, the 70D is a very good camera for photos, but the video options has been clearly added to it as an afterthought. On top of it, it's a huge bulky piece of equipment that weighs 1.5 kilograms with the standard 17 to 55 mm kit lens. So it works fine when filming from a tripod, but when you need to move a camera, especially around something as small as most Lego builds, it becomes quite unwieldy. I wanted it to be my primary camera, but found it so ill-suited for my videos that I've ended up buying the G7 instead and keeping this monster for photos. As you see, I'm using it with a hand strap, obviously because dropping such a massive piece of equipment would result in earthquakes and floods. These cameras are famous for their durability, but why take chances? Next, we have a GoPro 7 Black, bought back in 2018. It's been through a lot, I even took it with me to Australia, so it's a little banged up but works just fine. I only had to replace the original battery recently. It's the last GoPro camera that makes sense for me. The cameras that followed were bigger, heavier, didn't fit the existing accessories, and had too few ports in two weird places. I use GoPro cameras mostly by attaching them to my models, so I need them to be as light and small as possible. 7 retains the same size factor as the older GoPros do, and it packs 4K, decent slow motion, great stabilization, and an LCD screen that surprised me with its high quality despite its tiny size. What I don't like about this camera is the not that great battery life, really poor audio, and the fact that the footage tends to look better on the camera's own screen than it does when downloaded to a computer later. So you can't quite rely on the built-in LCD. I sometimes put my GoPro into this little off-brand cage. Just like my G7 cage, it offers many extra mounting options and increased protection at the cost of extra weight. Then there's GoPro 5 Session, which I only bought last year in second-hand. It's got vastly improved image quality compared to the first GoPro Session, it comes with a decent stabilization, and it's 4K capable. Quite impressive for a camera this small. I tend to use it wherever the GoPro 7 is too big or too heavy. For example, it's small enough to fit inside a Lego train and provide view through the windshield. There's a lot you can do with that camera, except see what it sees before you film, because it can only provide a live preview to your smartphone running a GoPro app. And it does it over Wi-Fi rather than Bluetooth, meaning that when at home, my phone needs to disconnect from the home Wi-Fi every time I want to see what this camera sees. Pretty annoying. And finally, the original GoPro Session, the so-called 4 Session. I got it as soon as it was released back in 2015 and it still works without any issues, but ever since I got 5 Session, I only use it as a backup camera. The two are exactly the same size, but 4 provides a noticeably inferior image quality and charges through a micro USB port, which feels positively medieval as of 2021. Also, no stabilization of any kind. Finally, there's a special camera called 360 Fly 4K. It shoots 360 degrees videos, meaning videos that allow you to literally look around as you watch them in the YouTube player. I have an entire playlist of these, including a 360 degrees video shot from a train going through a giant Lego city, and you can watch these using a VR headset too. It's a very unusual camera and it comes in handy under specific circumstances, but when it does, the results are pretty awesome. I even took it to Australia with me and filmed the Leap Error 9800 with it. I got this camera around 2016 thanks to you guys via crowdfunding, because it was rather expensive. So thank you and special thanks for Alex who made my crowdfunding campaign reach its goal. I've picked this particular camera because it uses a single lens, meaning that while it doesn't actually see everything around it, the resulting video is free of seams that tend to appear when the footage is stitched together from 2 or more lenses. I thought it's an acceptable trade-off, considering that you don't usually need to see under the camera because the only thing you're going to see is the camera mount. The 360 Fly is a decent quality camera and the footage it shoots still looks impressive against newer, fancier devices such as the GoPro Max. You just need to keep in mind that the image quality is worse compared to standard cameras, due to heavy processing required for the 360 degrees effect. I mean, this is what the raw 360 degrees video looks like before it's processed. I edit my videos using CyberLink Power Director 18, largely because I'm working on a 9-year-old PC equipped with GTX 770, and it just can't handle things like the Adobe Premiere. I'm also using the amazing DaVinci Resolve for additional color grading. Now, I won't be discussing the editing process because that's a huge separate subject, but I want to show you some color work behind my videos. I do basically 2 separate sorts of color grading. First sort is less invasive and done entirely in the Power Director, where I use a bunch of filters and a process called upsampling to clean up the colors, punch up the contrast, make the edges sharper and increase color saturation in some areas. I always aim to keep the colors as close to natural as possible, but I admit that there is some gray area here where the process can be just overdone and the colors look too good to be true. I do some color measuring and I always use neutral lighting to make sure that what I'm showing in a video are simply actual colors viewed under the best conditions possible. The other sort of color grading is done with the DaVinci Resolve and it's more aggressive. I use it almost exclusively for outdoor shots. In this case, the goal is mostly achieving a cinematic experience because while I understand that heavy color grading is controversial, I'm personally bored to death with natural colors. If I wanted to see natural colors, I would just go outside instead of watching videos. What I do exactly differs from video to video. In this case, I wanted mainly to bring out the car's lighting, but I also added some light leaks because they have reduced the amount of background details, helping to obscure the people walking around and to focus on the car. In other cases, like the one here, I simply use a tonal shift because I'm filming primarily green stuff but the sun makes it look too yellow. So most of the details are preserved and the overall brightness is mostly unchanged, but the tank looks more like a tank and less like Pikachu. And then there are really aggressive cases, like the one here. A filter this heavy means loss of some details and contrast, but for some reason bluish snow looks much colder and winter-like to me than the naturally white one. Plus I liked how the metallic gold pieces looked with this filter. Tripods seem like a trivial part of hardware because you just need to pick the least wobbly one. But there are actually many various types available, including some specialized ones like this Velbon X Macro tripod, which was made for macro photography. Its special trick is folding down so that the camera is just 21 centimeters above the ground level, but it still sits on a fully functioning tripod. As for standard tripods, for many years I've been using Weifeng WF5317T tripod and I was very happy with it, until one of the legs came apart and I just couldn't figure out a way to fix it. Other than that, it's a very stable, robust tripod that can have its legs independently unlocked, so you can tilt them up to reach above the camera level. What I'm using now is a tripod I've bought second-hand and I honestly don't remember make or the model. It looks like some old Manfrotto, but I'm not sure. There's nothing special about it except that you unlock the central extension using a central screw rather than screw that sits on one side of the tripod, which is convenient. With Weifeng, I always had to search for this screw. I also own a really old model of the Joby GorillaPod. It's a funny little thing with legs that you can bend or wrap around something. It can be useful when you need to film at weird angle, but it's actually not so much a proper tripod as a fixed camera mount. It's simply too light to hold anything heavy, like a DSLR camera with a tripod head that allows movement, so I only really use it for GoPro cameras and only when I don't need to move them around. Finally, here's a tripod with a warning. It's a Hama Star 63, a $30 tripod which I bought because I was tempted by the option to elevate my camera using this crankshaft here. But there's a reason why this tripod is so cheap, namely it's mostly made of plastic and very wobbly. It works fine for photos, but trying to use it to move a camera is a hopeless endeavor. Lesson learned, you get what you pay for. Oh wait, I do have one Hama tripod that works fine. It has nearly non-existent load capacity but can handle a GoPro camera. I have already covered my primary lamps, 2 softboxes, in the studio section. I also use a small portable LED softbox by the Came TV company. Again, I bought it second-hand and I don't remember the exact model. The softbox can be powered from a wall socket or using 2 batteries, which makes it totally wireless. I use it for filming outside my studio, but it's also very useful for playing with light and shadow. You can get shots like these by using this softbox as the primary or the only source of light and moving it in a certain way. A lot depends on the shape and texture of what you're filming, but coupled with a dark gray backdrop it can produce some really cool footage. Another advantage is that the brightness of this softbox is adjustable and sometimes you need cold white light but only a little of it. For example, I filmed this with this softbox at minimum brightness and holding it on top of my head, because more light would ruin the illumination behind the bike. For even more mobile lamps, I use small LED panels from Ulanzi. They produce nicely diffused light thanks to a milky plate covering the LEDs. They have their own internal batteries, they can be mounted using hot shoe and their brightness and light color can be adjusted. You can switch between cold white and warm yellow light using a dial that gives you plenty of control. On the downside, the dials are very exposed so you can accidentally turn the lamp on while putting it in your pocket, and the power cells are unreliable and seem to discharge at random. For colored light, I have been using the Bloom lamps, which are part of the Philips Hue system. These lamps can produce plenty of light at any color, but need a wire and a smartphone app for control. That's why I've recently started using small RGB LED panels from Ulanzi. They are smaller than the non-RGB lamps, but similar to them otherwise. They too can be mounted using cold shoe and have internal batteries. The brightness and color of each panel can be adjusted and the light is well saturated and diffused. On the downside, These panels are fairly small so you can forget about illuminating anything large with them, but for most LEGO projects they are powerful enough. The power cells in the panels also seem rather unreliable, and that's why I have 3 of them, because I expected a power cell in one panel that I already had to die, so I bought another one. But all 3 still work fine. And finally, the colors between different panels don't quite match, meaning that different panels set to the same color value produce slightly different colors. But you can still achieve pretty good results using several panels set at different colors. I'm using a simple camrock slider, 100 centimeters long. It's a pretty basic one, but it can be mounted at almost any angle using tripods. I sometimes use it for slow motion shots of fast vehicles too, because it allows me to launch the camera in a straight line so that it moves together with whatever it is I'm filming. In addition, I have motorized this slider using a LEGO contraption that consists of a LEGO PFM motor and a simple winch. The winch is fully exposed so I can unwind it by hand rather than wait for the motor to do it. It allows me to slowly move the camera at constant speed. You simply can't achieve the kind of consistency when moving a slider by hand. As for dollies, I use this simple 4-wheeled dolly which is fitted with 5 mounting points, roller bearings, rubber tires and axles that can be steered. I don't know what brand and model it is, sorry, but I know it's available in several various lengths. Last but not least, when I need to move the camera on a flat surface I often use this little off-brand motorized dolly rather than the slider. It's got a motor in 3 wheels, it can drive along a straight line or follow an arc, and it's got decent load capacity for its size. On the downside it only has a single speed and it only drives in one direction, and it's powered by a rather rare battery. Shots like these are best done using this dolly, because a slider would get in the way. Sliders are useful when you need a camera moving sideways or vertically, but forward and backward movement is where it's hard to keep the slider out of the frame and out of the way. And then there's a trick I have learned from a professional camera operator, using a towel. Or any thick piece of cloth that's not very stretchy. You simply lay it flat, place your camera on it and put your hands on both sides of the camera. You stretch the cloth between your hands and you put your weight on them so there is a lot of pressure on the cloth and the camera doesn't wobble. This allows you to move the camera very precisely and slowly while keeping it on the ground level. It works best with sideways movement and you can rotate the camera too, but I wouldn't use it for forward and backward movement because you won't be able to keep the movement perfectly straight. Still, with a little practice you can get shots like this. And it's priceless to be able to tell people later that you filmed this with a towel. While GoPro cameras don't need any gimbals these days, my DSLR camera still does, and this is where my Feiyutech A1000 comes in. It's an old version with a load capacity of just 1 kilogram, but that's just enough for my G7, even with a cage on it. The gimbal itself is pretty solid, it's got several modes and it's really robust. I use it with a 2-handed grip because it's a fairly heavy piece of equipment. I appreciate this gimbal for the high build quality and good battery life, but it's still a heavy handheld gimbal so the footage you get can be a tad shaky. And I mostly use it outdoors when I need to move around, for instance annoying the trial truck drivers by getting in their way. While I don't really use a smartphone for filming, I do have a DJI Osmo mobile gimbal for smartphones. It's the first version. DJI is currently at version 4, But to be honest, the first one was already so good that I never felt the need to upgrade. Especially since the newer versions are gray and light gray, and I prefer my video equipment to be black so it doesn't show that much on the reflections. The Osmo does a lot of things very well, but the feature I specifically bought it for is tracking. You can mark an object on the screen and the gimbal will automatically move the camera to track it. It's a pretty amazing feature that opens up plenty of possibilities for budget filmmakers. I know that there are gimbals with tracking for DSLR cameras too, but they too rely on a smartphone camera and that can introduce a little inaccuracy between where the two cameras are pointed. That inaccuracy may be negligible when filming buildings and people, but it can show with small objects such as most Lego builds. As far as I know, Osmo One is also the only version equipped with the standard 1/4-inch mount, which allows it to connect to standard filming equipment, including magic arms. And this is where real magic happens, because it means that I can put this gimbal on a motorized slider and get a camera that moves while tracking the subject. And that means that you can shoot footage with 6 degrees of freedom, where the camera moves while panning and tilting. It takes a lot of setup to make it work, but I think the results are well worth it. The only downside of using Osmo, except for the fact that you're filming with your smartphone and not with a proper camera, is that you need to keep the handle close to vertical for the gimbal to work. There are situations where it requires mounting the gimbal far from the slider's centerline, and this can introduce some vibrations while the camera is moving. You can usually mitigate that by supporting the gimbal with your hand to reduce the load on the slider, and the resulting footage is silky smooth. I had a need for a motorized turntable ever since I've started reviewing Lego sets, and for a long time I was using one build with Lego pieces. Here are the Sacred Hailfire Droid wheels, one of the rarest Lego wheels in existence, and I was using 2 of them with a bunch of Lego soccer balls between them and a motor inside, all of it acting like a big ball bearing. I would place a white or black acrylic sheet on top of that to cover the mechanism and to get some nice reflections. The problem was that the balls had a tendency to fall out every time I moved the whole thing, and diameter of the wheels was a little over 20 centimeters, which was not enough to support bigger models properly. But a few months ago I've happed upon an IKEA Lazy Susan called Snutta, and I've decided to adapt it instead. I no longer have any problem with my balls, and because Snutta is almost twice as big as the Hailfire Droid wheels, it can handle big loads with ease. You can find more about how this turntable mechanism is built in a separate video which I'm linking in the video description, and you will find building instructions at my website. There are times when your camera's own screen isn't enough because you need something larger or placed somewhere else. Using camera with a gimbal is one such case. And that's why a long time ago I bought a 7-inch CineGen video monitor, which was pretty much the cheapest monitor available, but it also featured several various inputs, including a 3.5mm video jack, which worked with a GoPro gimbal I was using back then. It's a very basic monitor with an image quality that makes your eyes hurt, but it's large and bright and has that port I wanted as well as 2 others. It can be powered from a wall socket or using the same battery my Canon camera runs on. It comes with a single 1/4-inch connector, and it comes with a removable shroud, which can be actually a lifesaver when filming outdoors. So the image quality makes it barely usable, but it's not a bad product considering how cheap it was. Last year I needed to address that bitrate limitation on the G7 because it was making my outdoors videos look bad, so I've managed to save some money and buy a second-hand 5-inch Blackmagic Video Assist monitor. This is a professional grade equipment, very different from my Cine General. It's got an excellent touchscreen display, 6 1/4-inch connectors and a ton of options, from several different focus markers to all sorts of guides and grids, and it can even have a LUT uploaded into it and applied to the footage, so you can actually see how your footage is going to look after color grading. But for me the key feature is its ability to record video. It's not 4K capable, but it comes with a variety of codecs to choose from, including ProRes at bitrates up to 220 megabytes per second. That's 11 times the bitrate of the G7 camera, and it makes a real difference. Of course, I wouldn't really need it if I could just buy a better camera instead, like Lumix GH5 or Blackmagic Pocket 4K, but seeing what's happening with my channel, this is unlikely. The monitor can be powered by two standard LPE6 batteries, same as my Canon camera, and it uses one battery at a time, which means that you can swap the other while keeping the monitor on. One major downside of this monitor is that it only works with a few specific SD cards, most of which are no longer in production. It also eats up the batteries fairly quickly, and its cooling gets loud when stressed. Let's start with the most unusual one. This is a folding shoulder rig, the S955 Krypton Pro model if I'm not mistaken. The idea is that it keeps the camera secured to your torso while keeping your arms free. It does so by locking against your belt, and it comes with this little plate that helps with that, and then the upper part of the rig, which is somewhat flexible, goes over your shoulder and wraps around it. The head in the center has a lot of movement and adjustability options, and a quick release plate too. It may look weird, but it's a surprisingly comfortable and stable way to shoot a video, and controlling the camera movement with your torso gives you a lot of options. On the downside, it's a heavy piece of equipment, it can be exhausting to use for a prolonged time, and for me it always feels like the upper part is going to slip off my shoulder. And you have to remember that the only stabilization it has comes from your own body, so you can get fairly stable footage when standing in place, but forget about filming while walking. Next, we have a classic off-brand example of a so-called spider rig. It's foldable, it's equipped with 3 arms, and 2 of these are supposed to go in front while the third one rests on your shoulder. I never had much luck with stability of this rig. The shape of the rear leg just doesn't conform to a human shoulder too well, making it uncomfortable and hard to keep in place. But it's got a ton of possible configurations, including an extending section of the rear leg. It's very light compared to the Foden rig, and it's full of strategically placed 1/4-inch connectors. Last but not least, a very basic rig based on a Joby Ultra plate. It's essentially a cheese plate with 1/4-inch and 3/8 of an inch holes, but also with a place to mount the camera on top. Nothing fancy, but can come in handy for small DSLR cameras or GoPro ones when you need some extra holes but you don't want to put the camera in a cage. I'll be honest, I know next to nothing about recording sound because I very rarely have to do it. But when I do, it's usually with a video mic go from Rode. It's a simple directional microphone, a so-called shotgun mic, because you just point it at roughly what you want to record. It's got decent range, but don't expect pinpoint accuracy from it, as it tends to record sounds from behind your subject a little too well. In the rare instances when I need to talk to the camera, I use this off-brand lapel mic which just plugs directly into the camera. Nothing fancy here, but it gets the job done as long as it's placed near your mouth. This model has a standard clip which is also magnetic, so you can make it stay on a metal surface. And here's the trick, sometimes you need to use a mic with a GoPro camera, but these cameras have gotten rid of the audio jacks a long time ago. So here's something that many people want but only few people get, a GoPro microphone adapter that plugs into the USB-C port. These adapters aren't made anymore. There are no working alternatives as far as I'm aware, and it took me months of searching to get a chance of buying a second-hand one. I'm using the Mavic Mini, or as it's called now, the DJI Mini. It's a tiny drone with minimum equipment, but DJI are so good at what they do that it's sufficient for my aerial video needs. Especially since I haven't had a chance to use it for a LEGO video yet, but it will come eventually. The Mini has no proximity sensors, no 4K video, and a pretty lousy range, and I wish I could afford Mini 2 instead. Still, it's a very capable drone which provides impressive image quality for the price, and it's so reliable and safe that I've only had one crash landing in well over 100 flights. It's one of my favorite pieces of equipment, and I'm looking forward to filming some LEGO stuff with it. Well, okay, I did use it for one model, but it was a rather unusual one. It's time to tell you the truth. All the many categories in this video only served one purpose, to make it look like I'm not a hoarder. But we came to a point where this may not work anymore. Because I have every standard GoPro camera mount and then, a wrist mount, a chest mount, a head mount, a doggy mount. No, seriously, I put it on Muffin once when she was younger and faster. As you can see, she's actually faster than most my Lego builds, but she goes too fast, her ears come off. I also have a chest attachment for the GoPro Seeker backpack, which I also own because it's a very practical backpack provided you can buy it secondhand, like I did, because the full price is just ridiculous. I also have a GoPro clip with a magnet. The official GoPro suction cup, which is allegedly rated for up to 200 km/h on the outside of a car. A Joby suction cup with a Joby magic arm. The GoPro Jaws, or at least their cheaper copy. Joby action clamp with a Gorilla Pod arm. Pretty good if you mount it right. A Kingjoy selfie stick, which I mostly use to put cameras underwater. Finally, I also have these custom 3D printed Lego adapters for GoPro cameras. These were designed by 7 Studs and printed by Shapeways, and I believe you can still get them, or get similar ones. Of course, only the body is 3D printed, you have to borrow the screws and metal parts from another GoPro mount. And here's an adapter that allows you to put GoPro cameras on standard tripods. Speaking of putting weird stuff together, I have a few cheap 7-inch magic arms and one 11-inch one. You can connect all sorts of things at all sorts of angles using these, such as for example this smartphone mount. I also have a small cheese plate that mounts on top of a cold shoe. I was using it to put stuff on my camera before I got the cage for it. And finally, I have the weirdest mount of all, which I only found recently, the official Hot Wheels GoPro Session mount. Yes, it allows you to ride the GoPro Session camera along Hot Wheels tracks. This is going to come in handy sooner or later, as my son has already started building his Hot Wheels collection. My channel has been overrun by tiny furry rodents starting with Mr. Fluffy around 2008. Many more hamsters followed, in all sorts of colors and various levels of obesity, because they rarely live past 2 years. I enjoy working with hamsters immensely because they're like living stress balls and they're always curious, and they fit into most Lego builds naturally thanks to their tiny size. They can even travel on Lego trains. They are also easily tamed and never pass an opportunity to have a little snack. They may not live long, but it's a life of adventure and my channel wouldn't be the same without them. Also, hamster butts are just pure magic. Ever since I got married to a veterinarian, we also had a number of dogs and cats. Most important is definitely Muffin, the smelly old pug, who likes to come over whenever I film and act as a senior ins pug tour. Muffin is almost never called by name because she's earned so many nicknames. I believe one of her favorites is the Swamp Gremlin. She's very serious about her job. She's also just about to turn 14 and a bit senile, but with a little medication she manages to perform her very important duties flawlessly. And on top of that, she can make just about any sounds you can imagine, and quite a few you wouldn't dare to imagine. I don't know where I would be without her, but probably somewhere less smelly and sticky. Other than that, There are two goals in Muffin's life, to always be near me and to lick everything around her. So you can guess how it goes. She licks furniture, she licks my cameras, she licks my trousers. It's a wild ride.